Welcome to another episode of Conversations and Connections. We're the official podcast of the Family Crisis Center of East Texas. I'm Stuart, the Prevention Coordinator for the agency. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and I wanted to have someone from our agency on the podcast this month to actually kind of talk more about sexual assault, the services that the Family Crisis Center provides, and things along those lines. So with me is Emma Skinner. She's our Sexual Assault Client Services Advocate for the agency. Emma, thank you so much for taking some time out. You've had a very busy day today, I know, but you've still found some time to come out here and talk to me today, so I appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
I want to kind of start out really broad when it comes to sexual assault services that the Family Crisis Center provides. I think a lot of times, people may think of us tied to domestic violence victims, maybe human trafficking victims, but they may not realize that we do service victims of sexual assault. If you would kind of talk to me a little bit about the services that a survivor can receive from the Family Crisis Center if they've been a victim of sexual assault.
Mm-hmm. So victims of sexual assault can receive services like counseling. We have male and female counselors available. They can receive services like legal advocacy, and that's something I spend a lot of time doing, working on protective orders, divorces, custody, things like that. Transitional housing, they use those services a lot. So the same services as domestic violence survivors are available to survivors of sexual assault.
Okay. What can we do? What can we do if we know someone who is a survivor of sexual assault? What can we do for them? I think sometimes that is such a huge grievous thing that can happen to someone, mm-hmm. and maybe a loved one or a friend can be overwhelmed by it as well and really may not know how to deal with that. Mm-hmm. So what can we do if we know someone who is a survivor of sexual assault?
Yeah, so I would say, like you said, it's a hard thing to hear, especially when it's someone that you love and care about, but try not to have too big of a reaction. Sharing something like that in itself it takes a lot of courage, and it's a risk. Telling somebody about something like this. And so I would say, first of all, just try not to have too big of a reaction. And second, just be a safe place. Offer them resources if they want it. Be equipped with things like our hotline. That's a great resource because that's an anonymous text line if someone needs it to be. So just being willing to be there for whatever the survivor needs.
Yeah.
Whether that's a listening ear, that text line, if they need a friend to go with them to make a police report, right, or speak to an advocate. It's really empowering for a survivor to know that friend or family member is they're there for whatever they need. It's about them again.
If someone comes to a person saying, "Hey, this happened to me," you emphasize be that listening ear, mm-hmm. offer them resources, obviously, things like that. Should you really question them that much? Should you ask them? Instinct would tell me you probably wouldn't want to ask them a lot of questions about it. You really probably want to be mostly on the receiving end.
Yes, I completely agree. And that's a hard thing to resist asking those questions because I think a lot of us are kind of fixers and we're like, how can I make it better? We jump into action when we hear something like this. And there's a time for that. But initially, I would say definitely resist asking those questions and lean more into asking, how can I be there for you? What can I do to help?
Sure,
things like that.
Sure. Take into consideration the area that we serve here in Deep East Texas and the population that we serve. Are there specific populations or groups that are more susceptible to sexual assault? And I want to word that in a way. It doesn't sound like, well, it happens more to a certain class of people, but in your experience, and I know we may go into this a little bit, you're pretty new to the agency, mm-hmm. into this line of work. Do we see trends that it seems like it happens more to a certain demographic, I guess, is what I'm asking.
So I would say sexual assault can happen to anybody. Any gender, age, race, socioeconomic class, it doesn't matter who you are, it can affect anybody. But I will say where we are in a more rural area.
Uh-huh.
Communities are more isolated sometimes, and I think that is a vulnerability that predators look for.
Sure.
Is if they can get you alone easier, if they can keep you away from people. And living in a rural community where it's our smaller towns are more spread out, and we don't always have public transportation and things like that. I would say that's a vulnerability that we do have more so here in East Texas.
Yeah. Going a little bit to your reaction when someone may be approaching you as they're a victim or a survivor of sexual assault. Let's talk a little bit about victim blaming. So many times the victim is chastised or blamed for something that's happened to them. And you probably know as well as I do, me being in prevention, you hear the classic, well, what were you wearing? What did you do to maybe entice this perpetrator? Let's just talk a little bit about victim blaming and how negative that is for a survivor.
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to what you mentioned about resisting asking those questions. I think as humans, all of us are naturally, we try to rationalize things. We try to make something make sense. And something like sexual assault will never make sense. There is no ration behind that. So I think it's easy for people to fall into trying to rationalize it and make sense of it and ask those questions. And a lot of times that does turn into victim blaming. They're searching for something, they're searching for an answer, but there is no answer, if that makes sense.
And I think sometimes maybe the victim may even put the victim blaming on themselves as well. What did I do?
Definitely.
What could I have done? And I think it's very important to let people know that it's never ever going to be the victim's fault.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, they could not have done anything to deserve that.
Right,
period.
right. So how does the Family Crisis Center work with law enforcement and other officials? Obviously we don't do it all. We don't do everything. But what kind of part do we play in the whole system, I guess you can say, when it comes to working with law enforcement agencies and other government officials?
Yeah, so I just want to say our law enforcement partners are the best. We could not have better relationships with our law enforcement here in Lufkin specifically. So sexual assault survivors have certain rights, whether that's to getting a examination after an assault or to having an advocate present for interviews and meetings and things like that. And Lufkin PD and Angelina County Sheriff's Office are both extremely willing to invite us into those spaces. They always make sure that those survivors have those resources, and we are very fortunate there.
Right.
So sometimes we come into the picture because law enforcement has asked us to assist with a protective order or something like that. Sometimes they bring us our survivors. They'll bring them to the safe house to get them out of a dangerous situation, things like that. A lot of times it takes those law enforcement agencies and other entities in our community inviting us in because we are that extra support. We can be a resource that they might not have time to give, or because survivors, sometimes they just need a listening ear. They need that extra time, that extra, just kind of that extra mile that we don't, law enforcement is busy, other officials are really busy, and sometimes we can offer that time. We are welcomed into a lot of spaces.
So how important is it to raise awareness and educate the community about sexual assault? There's so many folks out there that I'm afraid they have that mindset. Well, it can never happen in our community. Mm-hmm. It can never happen here to our family or in our community. And it does. And you have to face reality. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, again, how important is it to raise awareness and to educate the community about the sexual assault issue?
I think it's extremely important because if we are not educating young people and children starting there, they're not going to feel comfortable coming forward if something like this happens to them. If we don't educate them, then they don't always know how to identify that this already did happen to them, things like that. So if we're not having conversations about it, people are not going to feel comfortable coming forward, and then they're going to go without that support that they need.
Right. Our theme at the Crisis Center this year for Sexual Assault Awareness Month is Don't Stop, believing the victim. Have you ever ran across someone in your office whose family, let's say, didn't believe them? And what is that like for a victim?
We do see that, and there's nothing more isolating for a victim
Yeah.
than when the people closest to them are not believing them. It's devastating for them.
Sure. I guess I want to ask you, and I really, especially whenever I have one of our agency employees here on the podcast, because I'm always fascinated, just interested, what inspired you to pursue this career? What did little Emma want to do when she was growing up, and what led you to choose to go on this path?
Yeah, so I think the main thing would be I want to create those safe spaces for people. I want to create that environment and to be that person that someone feels comfortable talking to about these hard things, because I think that a lot of children specifically don't have that person and don't have that space. And so I'm passionate about creating safe spaces.
Okay. And you just recently, I say recently, when did you graduate?
So I'm still working on my master's degree.
Okay.
I'll graduate in like 4 months.
So, but I first met you. You were an intern. You were one of our interns here, not very long ago.
Yeah.
And you went from internship right into as an employee.
Yes. I was incredibly fortunate. The timing of the advocate that I was shadowing transitioned to a different agency, and it just kind of made sense. And I'm incredibly fortunate to be here.
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks so much. Again, Emma Skinner, our sexual assault client services advocate. That is a very long title.
I know. Tell me about it.
Emma, thank you so much. I know you've been really, really busy today, and I appreciate you taking some time to come over and talk to me here for a little bit.
Yeah. Thanks, Stuart.
All right. So again, if you have any questions or if you feel like you need the services of the Family Crisis Center, we do have our toll-free number. That's 1-800-828-7233. Also, be sure to subscribe to Conversations and Connections via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast service of your choice. Also, if you would like to donate, go to our website, FamilyCrisisCenterofEastTexas.com. There at the bottom left, you'll see a donate button. Click on that if you'd like to make a monetary donation to help survivors of relationship violence. Be the voice, if not for you, for someone else.